So my last video about the Wrestler Archetype went really well, and a lot of people wanted to build their own things, and I think that's great. But I thought that I'd throw my hat in the ring again and just say what classes I felt were the best to utilize along with the archetype. So, in order to start us off, I'm just going to get something that I think is decently obvious out of the way. I am going to throw Psychic, Sorcerer, Wizard, and Witch all into it's really, really difficult to make it work, because none of these classes have access to any types of armor, so doing a strength build with them usually requires an archetype like Champion or Sentinel, or quite a lot of general feats from something like Human, to even have the ability to invest Strength plus Cast Stat. If you're not doing Casting Stat, you're not really using these classes' main thing, because they are the Cloth Casters that have a lot of their class power budget and spells, so you're going to really, really end up struggling as soon as you start getting into the game itself. So with that, I'm going to put all four of those classes down there. I think every other class in the game has at least a little bit of a grapple build that will work, and this will go over whether or not Wrestler Archetype should be a part of that, and how good that is compared to the class's normal playstyle. So I want to start my rating with the Barbarian, because I think that Barbarian is a pretty good class to start with here. And the reason is that it already has a subclass that is devoted to grappling, in the Animal Instinct Barbarian, which I might throw on screen now, I don't know yet. But the point of that one is that it lets you have a specific type of unarmed strike that you can then make, and because this is just a generic strike, you can do activities with it like combat grab and whatever. And Barbarian doesn't normally have a whole lot of strong activities that it's doing other than basic strike when it's raging. So Wrestler makes a lot of sense on one of those unarmed Barbarians. So because of that, I'm going to put up here, where if you're playing an Animal Instinct Barbarian, I think that Wrestler is definitely the way to go. So they might even have an argument for being up here. However, the other grapple feats Barbarian don't come on until much later, and a lot of those will be competing for action slots. If you're not playing free archetype, there are things that then compete with this in pretty big ways, but I'll leave it at like the bottom of S tier or top of like A tier, because I do think that the Grub Barbarian has a lot of power. So the Bard actually has a few interesting things to consider, because their main class feature is Inspire Courage, which is an aura that buffs +1 to attack rolls for not only all your allies, but also you. So they actually do have a way to get onto the par to do the strikes like a martial while buffing their team. And you can just lean on their spells and not need to invest into Charisma that heavily in order to do their damage cantrips. You just won't be hitting those performance skills for Inspire Courage as often if you go that route. And you can get medium armor through one armor training feat, and you won't be getting expert naturally anyway until very late in the game. At which point you could probably also dip into Champion, or also do one of many things that would then let you have scaling things. Sentinel Archetype is another. So there's actually not as much anti-synergy as you would expect in the Bard, due to all those factors combining. So because of that, I'm going to say that you're still ignoring some class features, because you will need to put downsides into your spellcasting stat, and you're not really going to be being a full spellcaster, because the Bard list does have some offensive will save spells that you could see in my top 10 best spells video. Eye Icon will be over here, that's where the eye icon is. It should be pop up now. But Bard really wants to be casting a lot of those debuff spells, and if you're dumping your Charisma, you're not getting as strong debuffs. So you do have to lower the power of some of your baseline class features in order to go into wrestling, but there are some very, very potent things you get from it, and it's a neat little build. Now onto the Cleric. Let's do something a little controversial, alright? Cleric's an S tier. Now, let me justify this. I'm going to explain myself, alright? So, let's look at War Priest. War Priest has a couple pretty fundamental flaws. Law number 1, your weapon accuracy progression is not the same as a normal martial. It is far worse. You will never hit Master. Well, until the remaster, which gives it to you at level 19. Yep, level 19. So anyway, but there is one thing that progresses the same no matter if you're martial or caster: your athletic skill. And clerics, starting at level 1 if you're a human, for War Priests, can get this funny little focus spell called Athletic Rush. Athletic Rush gives you a +2 status bonus to all of your athletic stuff. That is your escape DC, your actual thing to grapple, and all that stuff starting right there at the beginning of the game. You then have this incredible ability to grapple people, and get them in those logs. So you can cause a lot of problems very early on, and as a cleric, well, you don't really have the same debuff spells a bard would. So there's no real need to have a high wisdom as a war priest. I mean, your spellcasting pressure is already lower anyway. So you might as well do buffs and heals. And cleric did a bunch of extra heals. So now you're an incredible healer, and on the turns you're not healing, you're stopping something else from doing damage. That sounds like one of the best possible tanks, but you're not doing it in the durability fashion, so it's a non-traditional way to tank, but it's still very, very strong. And if you're doing a deity like Aurori that has Fist as a weapon of choice, the divine weapon, you actually get a d6 fist attack as if you're a monk without a stance. That's pretty interesting. So because of all that stuff, you actually have a pretty solid build. And now, for those, I'd still recommend taking Combat Grab and Suplex, because it's really good to be able to target several DCs to do things. But beyond that, you can focus on things that just have you roll Athletics instead of unarmed strikes, and have the same accuracy as a normal martial, if not better, due to the Athletic Rush. So, get some S tier. On a similar note, Champion is going to be S tier ahead of Cleric, because everything I just said about War Priest with Athletic Rush also goes for Champion. And Champion already naturally is built to protect allies and take hits and soak all this stuff. And Champion doesn't really have ways to modify their strikes other than multi-classing, and, well, if you're already going to be looking for something to be doing with your strikes, well, you know, applying the grab condition, applying the prone condition, those are some of the most powerful things you can be doing, especially as a lower level character, and champions aren't really meant to be doing that much damage anyway. So what you'll be losing is you'll be losing like a big weapon if you're going for a paladin where you want to get big retributive strikes off, but if you're a redeemer or something along those lines, or a liberator, these champion subclasses that don't make strikes as a reaction as often, having a lower damage main weapon doesn't matter as much, and further limiting the opponent's action economy is a really, really big deal. So champion gets to stay in S tier due to how well it synergizes with champion's kit overall, and how you give up very little to go into wrestler on a champion. Now for Druid, you actually do start with medium armor, and the metal restriction of Druid armor will be getting removed in the remaster. So therefore, Druid will be going to cool style because you have medium armor, and you only need to make strikes in order to do any of the wrestling maneuvers. So if you were to, for say, be a wild Druid, which gets a +2 status bonus while you're transformed if your base modifier is higher than the animal you've transformed into, well, suddenly you have martial accuracy. And then after you leave your animal form or whatever, you then still have a bunch of slots that you can use for healing and buffing, or having more animal forms. That's pretty good. And so there's a lot of interesting things you can do with Druid, but the reason I'm keeping it out of S tier is it doesn't have that little bit extra that puts it up there, and you will be needing to give up your casting stat if you want to be fully tanky or fully all this, or you run into a bunch of other issues. And the reason I don't like dumping cast on Druid where I'm fine with it on Cleric is Druids have Electric Arc, and Electric Arc is good. Druids have Fireball. Fireball is good. Like, half of Druid's class identity is damage spells. At least in Pathfinder. So, or Pathfinder 2nd, I should clarify. So, it really has you lose a little bit in order to get into there, which is just what barely keeps it out of S tier. Now, Fighter. Fighter's an interesting one. Because you look at Fighter and you're like, this attack of opportunity has a lot of stuff that punishes people for being prone. You can get stuff that punishes people from skipping grab, a bunch of extra reactions at higher levels. But the issue with Fighter is Wrestler doesn't really give you that much more than you wouldn't have anyway, because they already get Combat Grab. Just like earlier than a Wrestler could give it to them. And they can get Snagging Strike as well, which is another big feat that you'd want from Wrestler. But you would get like Whirling Thrown and some other things, and Fighter gets Dazing Blow. So they're already having a lot of things that compete for these actions, while they have somebody grabbed, while they have all these other things going on them. So, I'm only going to put them in A tier for that reason. However, still very, very strong. And a combo that you might want to do on a fighter, if you're level 8, because that's when you can start getting Whirling Throw from Wrestler, is if you have somebody grabbed, you can try and just do one of your several strikes on them to get a multi-attack penalty, use Dazing Blow to try to stun them, and then Whirling Throw them while they're stunned. So now they are away from you, with fewer actions, and thus they have to spend like an entire turn coming back into combat, where you then put them back in the headlock. So, Fighter actually has a lot of sauce, You will need to find some way to get your base fist die above D4 through an ancestor or whatever, but that's pretty simple to do. The main reason I'm putting it there is a lot of fighters' feats are modifications to strikes, and a lot of wrestlers' feats are modifications to strikes. So you have a bit of conflict in what you're trying to do there, because you're having two things that are trying to compete for your actions at the same time. So you're going to have a rough bit go around. Gunslinger has a similar class gimmick to Fighter of bonus accuracy, but that's only for guns. And Gunslingers usually want to have an open offhand in order to reload, but there's ways around that with capacity weapons and other things. But you're going to have so many issues trying to make a Wrestler Gunslinger that there's nowhere I can put it other than very jank. And you still are a martial, so you can just go dex strength, and it's not that weird to get the stat array going. So you aren't immediately gimped from character select unless you're doing a very specific ancestry, get specific general feats to do a specific thing like you would for the bottom 4 classes there. But it's still, to try and get that to work, because you're going to be in melee with a bunch of things trying to grab them as a character that's designed to shoot off one shot at a time from range. But on the upside of Gunslinger, if you are something like a Drifter and you do a shoot, and then you want to reload, you can then try and do a combat grab with a knife on the gun, but whole bunch of things that you would then need to do, and then you're running into issues with runes, and there's, like, theoretically ways to make it work, particularly with the weapons that you will want to change your handiness on them, and then use them as a melee weapon, then make them a firearm, and there are ways to make it work. I just would not suggest doing it. In fact, due to how it's synergizing with the Gunslinger class features as I'm talking about it, I might drop it down to Heavy Weird. Oof. Poor Gunslingers. So with Inventor, this is actually pretty interesting, because you would think that Inventor would be knocked down because of the same reasons Fighter is, because it has activate abilities, and when people think about Inventor, they think about Explode, they think about Overdrive and all those things, but you really don't run into that many issues as an Inventor wrestler. Because if you're an armor innovation or something along those lines, the Overdrive buffs all of your strikes, including your unarmed ones. So these hands suddenly are doing damage, and the D4 doesn't look as bad, but still, better to go with an ancestor that gives you an unarmed strike like Lizard Folk, Knoll, etc. But there really aren't that many conflicts in your feats, because you can take a lot of passive feats or one-use unstable feats as Inventor, and just be completely fine. And then you can just be grappling something and maybe have the Construct Companion come in, bite them, and there's a lot of stuff you can do here. The issue is that it doesn't really have direct synergy with anything that Inventor has. Inventor doesn't give you any bonuses to Athletics, which is what is going to keep it out of S tier, because Barbarian, Cleric, and Champion all have some kind of thing that gives you a bonus to Athletics, or some bonus to Grapples, or some other interesting thing. Inventor doesn't really have that, but it's like a perfect class for just slapping Wrestler on, having a completely different style of game. So because of that, I'm going to drop into cool style. Alright, Investigator is wildly interesting for this, because they have one feat that lets you go for an athletics maneuver using your int instead of your strength, which I have not seen any Investigator actually take and use, but I have a very limited experience with the class, so that might be coloring my opinion a little bit. But normally with Investigator, your play pattern is you see if you can hit that guy, and then you either hit that guy or you hit the other guy, and from there, you then have one more action that you'll do to battle mass in yourself, or whatever. But with the Wrestler Investigator, I can't picture like an activity I'm happy to do in my mind that doesn't just throw away their main class feature, Strategic Strike. So because of that, I don't think I can put Investigator high up on the list, and then gets hit again by being so multi-attribute dependent, because like if you want to have a good escape DC, you need a high strength, but their class is only light armor that also wants int, where Inventor can get away with being int plus another stat because it gets medium armor. But because Investigators don't get medium armor, they have a much rougher go about this. So because of that, I'm going to put them in, you need to ignore some class features, they're very jank. Like, there is an argument for it because I do have that one feat, but I think that's right on the border between these two categories. I'm going to put it here, though, just because I feel like there are more different things I want to place into this category. You'll see. So, A-Magus actually surprised some people when I said that I don't think it makes a good wrestler, and that's because of the same things of like, oh, it's multi-attribute dependent, but like, that's not really why I think it doesn't work. I'm a big fan of dumping con, you know? Magus, its whole thing is spell striking, and a lot of Magus builds are about how do I make my spell strike as efficient as possible, because that's its main class feature. And that takes up 2 attacks because it puts your multi-attack penalty to -10. It needs time to recharge, so you're not really going to have actions to be spent on anything else if you're playing your Magus like fully optimally. So you're going to need to start ignoring class features if you want to just grapple stuff. But it is definitely better than Investigator. Definitely better than Investigator. Because at least you have the medium armor. And then you just have some spells, and then you do the grapples, and it's a very different way of playing the class. You're probably going to lean more into your Arcane Cascade stance to make sure your unarmed strikes are still doing damage, but it isn't like the worst thing you could be doing as a character, but it definitely is not the optimal way to play the class, where I think everything cool style and above can be argued to be optimal for their class. So, that is just a note. Ooh, my take on Monk will make some people mad, because you think wrestlers, and you think, like, unarmed macho men going in their, like, Speedos, so why don't the class that wears a Speedo naturally, why won't they be in S tier? And well, the thing is, Flurry of Blows is one of the main reasons you pick Monk. It's super fitting for Action Coming to go with these 2 strikes, but you can't lead with Flurry of Blows if you want a Combat Grab. And Combat Grab is a major reason to be taking Wrestler. And you're not doing it for that, and you want to get stuff like Crushing Grab and Whirling Throw, just go with Athletics and then do it with Flurry of Blows. That's all like baseline Monk feats anyway, so Wrestler doesn't actually give them a whole lot. There are incredibly good Grapple Monk builds, but Wrestler doesn't add a whole lot to that because of the negative synergy with Flurry of Blows, because Monk already gains access to a lot of the stuff it would want. So Wrestler doesn't add that much to it, but it doesn't have you straight up ignore class features. I do think that Wrestler Archetype can still definitely be played on Monk and still definitely look very optimal, but it does require you to change the way you think about Flurry of Blows, and really consider how all of your turn is going to line up, with the knowledge that I'm also going to be making 2 more strikes, which you don't want to be making at these super low multi-attack penalties, so you're going to need to avoid Combat Grab. Not the biggest fan of the Monk with all the Wrestler activities, but the ones that Monk already gets for grappling are really good for the Monk class. So if I was just writing Monk as a grapple build, it would be up here. But I'm writing Monk as specifically a wrestler, so I'm going to put that here because I do not think the Wrestler Archetype gives it more than it already has. Rogue. Rogue is a class that can get medium armor, and its main class feature, Sneak Attack, gives you extra damage to people that are flat-footed. Grab It applies flat-footed. It is going in S tier. I will now justify myself further. Their extra skills give you things that you can do aside from grappling on your turn, so that way you can do things that aren't necessarily attacks. You can cap out your Intimidation, cap out your Medicine, be your team's primary healer, cap out a bunch of these other useful skills to have as a frontliner, and then still be like a Strength, Constitution, like pretty bulky character. And there's some very, very funny tricks you can be doing as a rogue involving like grappling someone, still being a very high damage character because all of your things involve strikes, and then also apply a bunch of stats conditions to them, and it just makes your GM get really confused on why their creature has a bunch of stats elements on it, particularly when you start getting to high-level rogues and you have the debilitations. So it's really, really fun time. It does a good amount of damage. You're not losing that much of your roguiness for just deciding to have high athletics. So it's a great one for this type of thing. And it's a completely different take on the class. It completely reinvents how you do rogues, because now you're the setup for your team instead of the payoff. And it's wild time. Absolutely love it. Rogue deserves to be in S tier. Now, Summoner, this is the first very, very jank. Because, like, I could see ways to make this work. You go Champion Archetype, and then you're in there wrestling with your guy, but there's no real payoff for this. But you do have a good amount of HP. You can actually have your Eidolon strike to give you multi-attack penalty, then combat grab them as yourself. So you have a one-action strike plus strike combat grab type deal, which is actually very interesting, but the amount of hoops you need to jump through to get that interesting thing, and then be able to do the 2-strike, cast a spell, that also makes them grab in the middle of it, like, that's cool. But in order to get the arm class to safely be in melee as a strength summoner, is going to be a lot of work, because that'll probably involve a champion archetype, because you're a charisma strength character who doesn't have armor normally. you're going to have Champion Archetype, just like you are. So you're not going to take Wrestler until later, which means this build really, even with Free Archetype, won't come online till level 6 at the earliest. And you're going to be sacrificing a lot of very important summon feats to get there, so realistically it's not coming online till like level 8. And builds that come online till level 8, I can't call anything except very jank. So, it is the key thing for this strategy. But there is a very cool thing you get after that level 8 mark, but oh, it's going to be a rough time getting there. Now, Swashbuckler. I'm ready to make people mad again. Swashbuckler has a style that is all about grappling and suplexing people around, so why wouldn't you do it with Wrestler? Well, that one requires you to do exactly the grab action. And it requires you to do exactly these finishers to get the full payoff. And Wrestler, what does, it replaces what you want to do with your strikes. But if you already want to do your strikes to be finishers, and one of your main attacks to be like grabs, that way you can get the panache back. So it comes down to you're just setting up once, and then you're starting to ignore some class features. But it's definitely the best out of these for Wrestler Archetype, but you are going to need to ignore some class features in order to have Swashbuckler Wrestler be a full Wrestler instead of just a Swashbuckler that happens to have a slightly higher athletics and will be throwing in a Comet Grab occasionally. But in order to get the full Wrestler experience, Swashbuckler's class chassis actually does fight you a little bit more than you would expect. And I couldn't say that it's fully optimal for a Swashbuckler to be doing that, because it has so much payoff in itself, so you'd really be taking it for like a few specific feats and like Whirling Throw and stuff. So it still definitely gets you there. It's just that you don't get the full suplexing, just keep on juggling people around, throwing them from Wrestler feat to Wrestler feat that you would get with the other higher tier classes. So really, it's very similar to Monk, like there's a blend between these two things, and it's right on the border between these two tiers. So I'll put it there to make people slightly less mad at me for my opinions on the internet. Wild. So with Thaumaturge, it's actually pretty interesting, because Thaumaturge doesn't normally get a lot of activities that do things along with its strikes. It has a lot of passive feats, it has medium armor, it has a lot of other stuff going for it, it has ways to burn reactions, so it doesn't need Champion Archetype as much, because Amulet does the same thing, but like slightly different. So you really don't lose a lot by going Wrestler. And it has a lot of skills, it has some extra skill boost to get some other utility going. You don't need to have 2 hands, you can just have 1, that's your grapple hand, then your esoterica hand. And all of your strikes get buffed by that, and not just weapon strikes, it's all your strikes, so you do a lot of damage. So it's pretty similar to how Rogue functions. Thaumaturge tanks. Way to do crowd control, in addition to the hyper damage that Thaumaturge can normally provide, in addition to all of its utility. It's just another angle for you to take a Thaumaturge. I don't really see that much downside of it. You get to be a full Thaumaturge, and you, in your feats, get to have all this extra crowd control and all these extra abilities. So, highly recommend doing a Wrestling Thaumaturge. I have not really messed with Thaumaturge that much, but just looking over its feats, looking over its class features, all of it works with Wrestler. So, I want one of you to go do this, and then come back to me, and tell me how it went for you. Right? One of you is going to do it, right? Don't leave me, anyway, on to the Ranger. So, Ranger's whole thing is you get to pick a Hunter's Edge, and it does a thing. And I want to talk about Flurry Edge, because Flurry Edge is actually worded in such a way that all your attacks, not all your strikes, have a lower effective multi-attack penalty on your hunted prey. So you could do all your combat grab suplexing stuff at a very, very low multi-attack penalty. And, you know, these hands are agile, so you get a lot of value from that. And your animal companion would actually benefit from your edge as well. So you can actually have a scorpion also going and grabbing people, or whatever. You can have a bear that does its support benefit, and then you get more damage, and there's a lot of tech to Ranger Wrestlers. Because they get things that no other class does, which is that accuracy buff on future attacks. So even if you were to do like normal maneuver Wrestler and throw in a lot of weird stuff for a lot of attacks per turn, that third attack is very possible to hit. So you get a lot more combo possibilities as a Ranger Wrestler than you would as any other class. And for that reason alone, I feel completely justified throwing in a DAS tier. So yeah. So, Oracle with its Battle Mystery actually does, as a fun fact, gain benefits of medium and heavy armor training. So suddenly, a caster in full heavy armor. Good start. Then, it gets access to the Might Domain spell, Athletic Rush, which I already talked about, as being, a little good, and then it also gains access to some other benefits for striking every turn, and some accuracy benefits as a caster, and then also carry on his healing spells. You know, it's the Divine List, so you don't mind if your casting stat goes down a little bit. And because of that, I'm going to put it right behind Cleric, because I like Cleric class features a little bit more, because you're less reliant on this external thing declaring what you're going to need to do. And Cleric's more healing, I think, is slightly more useful than the Battle Curse for what you're going to be doing. But I would say that Oracle's better actually doing the grapples and getting the locks. I would say that Cleric is a bit better at everything else surrounding it. So, with that, you can make the choice. But I think, like, a Battle Oracle that constantly wants to go and just, like, grab things by the throat is a really interesting character concept. And it really works in this game because Oracle, when it's just wanting to strike, is just making basic strikes. So Wrestler gives it a lot of extra utility. Just going to put that there and leave that for the viewer to think about. And I left Alchemist for the very end. And there is a reason for that. Because, like, as of right now, it does have medium armor, but, you know, a lot of things can change in the remaster, but they said that they weren't going to invalidate any previous characters, so medium armor. There are some mutagens that would have you get a bonus to athletics, but you're going to need to be fighting with what Alchemist is trying to do, which is normally a backline type of support character that's making all these items and passing them out. And you can be boosting athletics and then doing stuff as mutagenous and getting bonuses that way. However, I don't necessarily think that that gives you that much more than other classes would, because if you want to do a skill-based one, you could do Rogue. If your end goal is just grappling and suplexing. Not getting up to Master in unarmed strikes and not having, like, full-on spell buffs like Heroism to make up for that really makes it so that I can't put it into full S tier. But it is definitely an interesting style, and you do have that medium armor, so there is definitely a way to make it work, with specific mutagens, with specific ways of planning. I can see an Alchemist Wrestler being very good. However, I do think that you will be conflicting with some of your class features, because you're going to be wanting to focus on mutagens that are buffing your athletics, rather than the other things that might be more situationally useful, and there's going to be a lot more things that are considering and floating around your head, because Wrestler is already a pretty complex thing, so if you're looking for the most complex character I can think of, Alchemist Wrestler is probably that. I'm going to put a little bit lower just because of that complexity, and I don't quite know exactly what you would want to be doing. But there are some mutagens that would give you basically like a +1 on other martials at a lot of times. If you know and you have them ready and you do all this pre-planning, you can then get these bonuses and counteract these downsides, and there are things you can be doing as a mutagenist Alchemist Wrestler. But I'm not convinced that will be the best way to play the class, which is also going to keep it out of S tier. So, with that, this is my tier list. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you agree. Let me know if you disagree in the comment section down below. I do read all of the comments all of the time because I am forever on my phone. Anyway, I'm going to transition to the end card now,